Well, let's talk about the process, what may or may not happen over the next few days, with Maddy Thimont Jack from the Institute for Government, who joins me now here at Westminster. Morning to you as well, Maddy. We're hearing very different things, aren't we, from the EU side and from government sources here about whether a deal can be done or not today. But we heard a couple of days ago already from the Finnish Prime Minister that legally and practically the UK can't leave by the 31st of October. Is that the case as you see it?
Well, it really does depend on what happens in the next couple of days at the European Council, whether or not there is a legal text agreed between the UK and the EU. Now, if that is the case, if they really can come to an agreement and have a published legal text, then in theory there can be a vote on Saturday about whether or not MPs here are willing to accept it. And if they do approve the deal, then sort of the next step is passing the implementing legislation, which is necessary before the UK can sort of leave in an orderly fashion by the 31st of October. And within that, there are some complications. You know, it's going to be a long and complex legal text, but sort of the way that parliamentary procedure works is that the government controls the agenda in the House of Commons, and they can pass legislation very, very quickly, even if it is highly politically controversial to do so.
If there isn't a deal, if the Commons doesn't sit on Saturday, the Prime Minister, we've just heard Steve Barclay say that the Prime Minister will write that letter to the EU requesting a Brexit extension. What happens then? What happens potentially between that point, the 19th, and the end of October?
So if the Prime Minister does send that letter, the letter asks for an extension until the 31st of January, but the EU 27 need to agree that. So we can imagine that the EU will decide what length of extension they are willing to accept. I mean, if they agree to the 31st of January, then the Prime Minister is obliged under law to accept that. If they propose an alternative date, well, then the Prime Minister can come back to the House of Commons, can hold a vote in the Commons to check that MPs are happy to leave on this sort of alternate date. And if MPs here agree to it, then the Prime Minister will be obliged to accept that extension. And there is a bit of an argument at the moment going on, I think, between EU member states about quite how long they are willing to sort of allow the UK to remain a member state.
But if the Prime Minister does send that letter, is he still going to be looking for ways to get around that?
I mean, I think sending the letter, if he's accepted he's sending the letter, then that is what's going to happen. And if he tries to do something else, I mean, there has been a suggestion of an alternate, a second letter accompanying it. If he does try and do something that frustrates the will of the Act, which is about seeking an extension, then we can imagine there would be challenges in court around that. So I think that at this stage, given the assurances Johnson has given to Scottish courts that we've heard Barclay to repeat them today, I think he will be following the Act at this point.
More broadly around the UK, then, that leaves business people, so many sectors in a limbo with them finding themselves in varying degrees of readiness. Some quite ready for whatever happens next, some not ready at all.
Yeah, I mean, this is the challenge, is that ever since the Benn Act, the government has continued to say that we are leaving on the 31st of October, sort of come what may. But actually, if the letter is sent and an extension is agreed with the EU, then that just prolongs this huge uncertainty, because, nothing can take no deal off the table until a deal is agreed, or potentially revoking Article 50. So that still is a sort of chance that might happen. So businesses will still need to prepare for that, but at a potentially later date. And what we don't know is, will an extension be to sort of try and iron out details of a possible deal, even if they can't agree one this week, they might try and get a deal agreed in the next few weeks? Or will it be a sort of longer extension where actually you're looking at an election or possibly a referendum before we sort of end up leaving the EU?
A word on the various opposition parties, Maddy. They have been relatively, and I use the word relatively, quiet in the last 24 hours or so. What calculations will they be making about what to do next?
I think that it will come down to whether or not Johnson brings back a deal. There's obviously some question about whether there will be a vote on a deal on Saturday, and there are some MPs who say they'd be willing to back a deal provided it's put to a sort of confirmatory vote afterwards. If he can't get a deal, if we do have a longer extension, then I think there will be a big question for them about whether or not they should support an election at this stage. And I expect there'll be some quite heated conversations going on internally in those parties as they try and figure out what their position will be. But I think all eyes are on the next 2 days, the European Council, see whether we can get a deal agreed in the first place.
OK, Maddy, thank you very much, as ever. Maddy Thimont Jack from the Institute for Government.